This is for a brighter future.
Well, this is going to be a real treat. We have been speaking with a number of the finalists for the Grammy Educator of the Year Award. Obviously, that was out of more than 4,500 around the country. The finalists came from 8 different states and 10 different cities. It's brought on by the GRAMMY Foundation and the Recording Academy. And we are now privileged to be speaking with the winner, the 2016 Grammy Educator of the Year Award, Phillip Riggs, out of North Carolina's School of Science and Mathematics, where he is a distinguished music educator and an instructor in humanities. And I'll embarrass you just a little bit more, Phillip, as we talk a little bit more about your background before we dive into the interview. But you are past president of the North Carolina Band Directors Association. You are a national board certified teacher, and you've worked both in the U.S. and in China. And other than that, you're just flying between North Carolina and L.A. for the Grammys. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, so this is, I'm sure you've had a little bit of time to sort of settle in and, adjust the bio on the school website and sort of think about your place in North Carolina and then really in the U.S. with music education. But tell me what that's been like now that you are you've landed back home after this rush of adrenaline.
Sure. The week in LA was amazing, and maybe we'll talk about that a little later. And as we returned home thinking, okay, we'll get to exhale a little bit and relax. And really that's not been the case at all. Fortunately, the various media outlets, particularly in North Carolina, but even folks like you have reached out to want to do interviews. And for me, really it's not so much about me winning and everybody else losing, but it's me getting the opportunity to be the spokesman for all the wonderful music teachers that are out there across the country. And so anytime we can get music education in front of the general public, I think that's a good thing. And so I'm grateful to all the media outlets, again, particularly in North Carolina, that have reached out and helped us do that. Just actually was in Washington, D.C. this past Saturday and had an opportunity to speak briefly at the National Board Conference, the Teaching and Learning Conference, and got to introduce Black Violin, which is a really dynamic duo, if you will, from Florida. So that was a lot of fun as well. But really, it hasn't stopped since we returned from LA.
Tell me about the sense of responsibility that you may or may not feel now, given this award and now the light that is being shown both on you, your work, and in North Carolina.
It really is tremendous when you stop and think about it. You hope to say the right thing, and you hope to again accurately represent what the needs are and how important music education is in all of our schools.
When I spoke with the other finalists, a couple of themes or threads sort of emerged in those discussions, and there were different opinions about music education and its place in the larger ecosystem of education here in the U.S. And I would love to get your feedback. Some of them talked about, they had this real visceral feeling about it that we need to stop defending music education, that it's almost that we have to sort of wave our hands and say, hey, look, we're over here, look at the value we provide. I'd love to hear your take on that. And riding that fine line between knowing you belong, obviously, as a subject in academics, and not drawing too much attention that says that there is an issue with being marginalized.
So all those are really on the forefront right now with the newest legislation that's come out of Washington, D.C. Obviously, music educators are excited about that and being recognized. I think one thing we try to place value on music and the arts because it teaches science, because it teaches math, because it teaches history. The bottom line is music for music's sake, at least for me. Yes, we do all those other things, but it's interesting with the latest research, neuroscience research, and fMRIs and that sort of thing. It's interesting to see what's going on in the brain when students are making music, particularly in ensembles. They're really using more of their brain simultaneously, according to the research, than probably in almost anything else they do in school. The cognitive, objective side is being used as well as the creative, and then trying to marry that with the fact that they're working with other students. It's it needs to stand on its own, I think, and it's not easy to test, and it's not inexpensive to offer quality music programs. But I think they really are vital, and many students, former students, it seems like everybody you meet talks about how important their music experience was in school. And for me, as I've reflected over the past month, and even in the talk with the national board folks last week, for me, it really boils down to relationships. And the content, most of what we teach in school, you can find on your phone now. From a content standpoint, it's really about creating relationships with your colleagues, with your peers, with your students, and there's no better way. There may be some as good, but I certainly would make the argument there's no better way to do that than through making music.
Phillip, talk to me about the relationships between teachers and the regard that the other established subjects have for music education, and how those discussions go and where we can improve in that area. We had one of the finalists talk about the daily challenge of kids being removed from music class to basically finish a test, to do other things in the academics that might be perceived as more important, right or wrong, and just sort of that delicate balance between how do we communicate that professionally between colleagues.
Sure, I think everybody feels that crunch for time with students, and particularly with the standardized testing, and then the reteaching to retest, and all those things that tend to happen, particularly at the end of the year, but really throughout the year. I think everybody's starting to feel more of those pressures that some arts teachers have felt all along. It is difficult, and also students working, video games. I mean, there's so many appealing things that are of interest to students that it's difficult for all teachers. I think I'm really fortunate at the North Carolina School of Science and Math that a lot of our math teachers, science teachers, other humanities teachers are also musicians or have been involved in music programs or theater programs, and they understand the value. It's still difficult to schedule. Again, on a campus like ours, there's so many amazing things. Some of our science teachers take students to run experiments in the anti-gravity plane, at one of the NASA centers. That's hard to compete with music rehearsal, as great as music is. But we're fortunate that all those instructors understand the importance of what we're doing. And I think the students that we teach do as well. I think the difficulty is it's sort of like some of our bigger society problems is really they boil down to fear and the unknown. And so, if somebody's from a different place or looks different than me or teaches a different subject than I do, it's the fear of, am I going to continue to be relevant, and am I going to be able to have the students I need necessary to do what I'm doing? So that's kind of where it is. I think not just for music in particular, but really for all the subjects now. We again in DC this past weekend were some pretty startling statistics of how little computer science is being offered in schools, and predominantly that's where most of the jobs of the future are, or at least related to computer science. So it's not just the arts. I don't think it's everybody trying to figure out how do we get 36 hours in a day into 24 hours in a day.
We're speaking with Phillip Riggs, the Grammy Educator of the Year award winner. We want to thank our sponsors at Soundtrap, where you can make music and podcast online, a collaborative tool for the modern classroom, and Google Education Partner. Okay, now you've done some work in China, so let's just sort of broaden the scope a little bit. Tell us about your perspective in music education around the world, and sort of where are we? Because we hear a lot of these results in the standard academic subjects related to PISA and sort of where we rank as a country. Are there rankings with regards to music education, and how do you view the global music education scene?
Sure. I don't know of any rankings per se internationally. I do know that we are one of the few countries that actually offer music education and the arts in general in our public schools. In the majority of the rest of the countries, only really the students who can afford to have those lessons or participate in ensembles outside their school day really get an opportunity to do that. And so again, I think that's really why it's important for us to continue to to not let it get pushed out of our public schools.
Tell us about the nomination process. I know in doing some research on you in the background of the Grammy Awards that you were nominated by a former student who is also now a music teacher as well, an instructor. So what was that like? I mean, I would imagine there was a great sense of pride to be nominated in that fashion.
Yeah, kind of like the commercial you've seen, the priceless commercial. Really, that in itself was, somebody that's chosen to the career path that you've chosen and does it well, and has two small kids. Actually, she and her husband are both band directors, so obviously really busy. But taking the time to make that nomination really meant a lot. And then through the process, becoming a semifinalist, a finalist, et cetera, just getting so many notes from former students and former parents thanking me for, again, the common thread seems to be in all those correspondence is the relationships. Very few talked about, I remember we played this piece, or you taught us how to do this musical concept. It's you took the time to get to know me. You took the time to make me understand how important music could be in my life, whether they continue to play or not. Just being educated music consumers, I think is probably the best way to put that. And so really for those people to reach out and identify some of those things that to me maybe seemed routine or like daily things I would do that really made an impact on who they are, even as adults now. It's just, we probably would not have had that conversation otherwise. So that part of it's been really exciting.
Let's talk a little bit about education reform. We talked, earlier about your sense of responsibility now with this platform. And we see so many different issues now discussed about funding and, allocation of resources and these different things around the country, public versus private. If you had your druthers, how would you integrate in a music education program into a community and potentially a school that maybe is under-resourced, but you obviously see the value? I mean, how can we approach that so that it's not the haves and the have-nots? Is there a middle ground in supplying music education from both a staff perspective, a resource perspective, and just an offering to the students?
I think, again, just reflecting, and even in the conference this past weekend, sort of had some thoughts as I attended some sessions. I really think multitasking in the classrooms. I think training teachers to use music as a tool, much like the computer science model that I mentioned. Maybe there's not time to teach computer science for computer science sake in some schools, but can we teach other content with that we need to cover through coding or through the use of computers? So the computer ultimately is a tool, and I think music's the same way. I mean, if you ask a room full of people, musicians or not, to say the alphabet with you, what are they going to do? They're going to sing the alphabet to you because that's the way they learned it. Multiplication tables, there's a very rhythmic aspect. If you're doing all the multiples of 3, you fall into some kind of sense of rhythm and sequence in there. So I think if we can find ways to incorporate music, and maybe if we're learning history or science, so maybe the lyrics or the text of what's going on is the content, but it's also being learned through music, then we've got to find a way to marry some of the subjects that we're trying to teach. Because again, we're trying to cover so much material and we only have a finite amount of time.
Tell me about when you were a young boy. What was the impact? How did you first experience music, and when did you realize the rush and the connection? You've mentioned relationships a number of times, so I would imagine that potentially you developed relationships in a similar fashion when you were a young boy, both to music and those that were teaching it to you.
Early in my high school time, when I first had the opportunity to play like in an all-district band or all-county bands or some where students were coming together from multiple schools, basically strangers, but came together in a couple of days with a clinic, a conductor who none of us knew, but all coming together to make music and have a great time together, just feeling the energy of what that is. I think at that point is when I really realized that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be that guy that could come together with 80 strangers and we could all have a wonderful time making music and really have some emotional experience that's really not, you can't describe in words, it's why we have music, and so that was probably the beginning of me thinking yeah, I think I'd like to do this, you know, as a career.
Tell me, let's close with this. Tell me, you know, when you started thinking about it from a career perspective, you know, obviously you might have been evaluating the pros and the cons. You know, you could have gone on and been maybe a studio musician or whatever you wanted to do in music. And you chose an education path with regards to music and the creative arts. For the young person out there that feels that they have a talent similar to yours, um, what advice would you have for them if when they're evaluating how they want to apply their musical talents and skills in an educational path?
Yeah, as far as the studio musician, I was not a good enough musician to do that.
Oh,
I mean, I own that, and that's okay. I loved music, but I also liked working with people and being a part of, as I mentioned, the sort of that community idea. So I think for me, just even as a young person, realizing where my strengths were, I'm I would dare say I'm not the best music educator that's out there, and I'm certainly not the best musician. There are tons of people out there that you know do that much better than I do. But I think identifying where your individual strengths are and then figuring out how you can apply them. Really, my work with the State Music Educators Association here, um, a lot of that's just been facilitating people to be able to share their strengths with others, and I think that's probably my biggest asset is being able to identify those things in other people and helping connect people and get them together to be successful at what they want to do.
you're a fantastic representative of music education and education in general. We wish you all the best. We want to thank Phillip Riggs at North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics, this year's Grammy Education Award winner. Once again, we want to thank Soundtrap. You can go to soundtrap.com where you can make music and podcasts online, a collaborative tool for the modern classroom.